Harry and Barbara never intended to become pro-life activists. But like so many Catholics in the 1970s, Harry and Barbara were horrified by the Roe v. Wade decision, and their faith compelled them to do something. So they started to attend local protest meetings, and then a state rally, and finally the pro-life march that happens every January in Washington, D.C. They showed up every year. Whether it was cold or snowy or rainy, Harry and Barbara kept showing up. Whether the crowds were bigger or smaller, Harry and Barbara kept showing up. And whether one of them was dealing with a health issue that particular January, Harry and Barbara kept showing up. But a few years ago, as Harry and Barbara were getting ready to travel to Washington for yet another pro-life march, their adult children intervened. Their daughter said, "Mom, Dad, you're both in your late 70s, and I don't think it's good for you to go to Washington and stand out in that cold weather all day long." And their son added, "Mom, Dad, you've been marching for decades now, and nothing has changed in this country. What will happen if you die and abortion is still legal?" And Barbara said to her son, "When I die, Jesus will not ask me whether I changed the Supreme Court's mind. Jesus will simply ask me, did you keep showing up to do the right thing?" And a few weeks later, Harry and Barbara showed up for the pro-life march, and they plan to keep showing up. As we have explored some insights about God's mercy, we have seen that God is the one who is always there for us. God isn't going anywhere. That is, our loving God will not abandon us. God keeps showing up, always. In response, we begin to learn how important it is for us to keep showing up, to be where we should be, to do what God wants us to do. Even when our well-intentioned family members or friends try to pull us in a different direction, even when life circumstances suggest that you have a good excuse to go somewhere else or do something else, even if nothing seems to be happening or changing. All of this reminds me of an amazing encounter that Jesus has with a woman in Matthew's Gospel. Some of the language can startle us, but listen again with fresh ears to this part of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 15. Jesus went from that place and withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not say a word in answer to her. His disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did him homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that hour. There's a lot going on here in Matthew's Gospel. First and foremost, there is one thing that this woman knows. Someone she loves is sick. Her daughter is suffering. Most parents will do anything anything to find healing for their child if that child is sick. Perhaps that is what gives this woman such tenacity. The gospel says that she is a Canaanite, which means that she's not part of the Jewish people who considered themselves the only chosen people. In other words, she is considered an outsider. And yet, she uses traditional Jewish language when she speaks of Jesus. She calls him Lord. She calls him Son of David. These are words that a faithful Jewish person would have used to name the Messiah. So, in a real sense, this woman is making a profession of faith. She's saying to Jesus, I believe that you are God's Son, that you are the one sent to save us. She tells Jesus what's wrong. My daughter is sick. And here's where it gets a bit uncomfortable, because at first, Jesus offers her no response. But let's stop there. Haven't you had an experience where you've prayed for God's help, and at first it seems that God doesn't answer at all? What do you do when that happens? Do you immediately give up on God or give up on prayer? This woman does not give up or go away. She has shown up, and she is not leaving. Next, Jesus says what his Jewish listeners would have expected to hear from him, that he was sent first and foremost to announce the saving mercy of God to the people of Israel. And that's true. That's what he has been up to so far in Matthew's gospel. Funny thing, though, some of the people of ancient Israel have listened to Jesus, and some haven't. Some have rejoiced in Jesus' message, others have objected and walked away. But this woman will not walk away. She is not going anywhere. Even if Jesus' first response makes it sound as though he's not going to help, she is not leaving. Someone she loves is sick. The gospel then says that the woman came and did him homage. Matthew doesn't tell us exactly what that means. Does she come and kneel before him? Does she prostrate herself to do him homage? Remember, that's the language used by Matthew to describe what the Magi do at the Epiphany. What we know is this: she takes her place in front of Jesus, and she has assumed some bodily posture of humility. And she says, Lord, help me. Picture that in your mind. The disciples want to send her away. Jesus didn't answer her at first, and then he gave her a rather gruff response. And what does she do? I like to picture her kneeling a few feet in front of Jesus. She has shown up. She is not moving. And she says to Jesus with determination, help me. This woman has fierce faith. And she needs it, because Jesus next responds with what sounds like harsh language about dogs and food. But this woman has fierce faith. She has shown up. Someone she loves is sick. And she uses her intellect and her creativity and her insight, and she takes Jesus' words, which sound insulting at first, and she hands them right back to him, as if to say to him, I'm not going anywhere, and you're going to help me. And he does. And Jesus praises her for her great faith. What makes her faith so great? I think the greatness of her faith is revealed in the following ways. First, even though she was an outsider, even though she had been told she wasn't part of the elite and chosen folks, she knew where to turn when she needed help. She knew that she needed the Lord Jesus. Secondly, once she knew that she needed Jesus, she showed up. And even when her original request for help was met with either silence or a harsh-sounding answer, she does not give up. She does not go away. Matthew says she did him homage. She kept asking for help. She doesn't leave. Even when others might have said, well, Christ isn't going to help you, she doesn't budge. She kept showing up, and her prayer is answered. She had fierce faith. Perhaps these points could invite you to ponder the following questions. Remember Harry and Barbara? They kept showing up. They knew that they had to keep showing up if they were going to be faithful to God. As we've explored the theme of God's mercy, we've seen that a key aspect of God's love is that God is always there for us. That's God's name, after all. That's God's truth. God is always with us. God forgives everything and will bind up our wounds. God finds us when we're lost and embraces us in love when we're suffering. God always shows up. And we have to keep showing up if we want to experience God's faithful mercy. Like the woman in Matthew's gospel, we need to show up in the presence of Christ and stay focused on him and know deep down that he is the one who can help us. I keep stressing this theme in this presentation because so many people stop showing up. They stop showing up, and then they wonder why God feels so distant. They wonder why their faith feels so weak. So many people in our modern culture want instant spiritual results. They want prayer to work like a text message. I send you a quick message, and you respond back quickly and clearly. And if God does not behave as I want, when I want, then I stop showing up. Or if my parish does not do what I want, when I want, then I stop showing up. Or if prayer does not produce what I ask, when I ask, then I stop showing up. I give up. And I try to live without the most important thing of all, what Pope John the 23rd called the medicine of God's mercy. Think of it this way. God's mercy is like the air. It's all around you. But if you decide to hold your breath, then you won't breathe it in. And eventually you'll wonder why you're feeling so badly. Well, our God is always surrounding us with mercy and kindness. But if I choose to ignore that, then I'm ignoring that gift. I'm choosing to live without it. God always shows up. But if I don't show up and pay attention, I will not see how God's powerful and present mercy is working in my life. And eventually I'll wonder why I'm feeling so badly. During this year of mercy, Pope Francis is inviting all people to show up, to focus on Christ with renewed attention, to keep showing up because we know that Christ is the one who can help us with his healing mercy. Sociological surveys tell us the sad numbers. For every one person who has joined the Catholic Church recently, 4 have stopped showing up. They've stopped practicing the faith. Many young adults who were raised in religious families have decided that they will find their meaning elsewhere. They don't need to show up. Many have been hurt by the church, so they stop showing up. Some feel judged by the church, so they stop showing up. Some have been scandalized by the clergy, so they stop showing up. Some feel that prayer didn't work, or that Mass has no meaning, that they don't need a community in which to practice faith, so they stop showing up. But in this year of mercy, Pope Francis has invited everyone to show up in a new and renewed way. Pope Francis reminds us that Jesus is constantly calling us to live our faith in the midst of a community. When Jesus called people in the gospel, he called them to join the community of believers that had gathered around him. And when he sent them out to do his work, he always sent them out at least 2 by 2, never in isolation. He drew people together, and he told us that we must love one another. And the one thing he asked us to do in memory of him was to gather together as the body of Christ to celebrate the Eucharist. The Eucharist is Christ's meal of mercy, and we need to show up. You might recall that story I told of the woman at the hospital holding her dying son in her arms as she was gently singing to him, "This is my body that I give to you." This helps me to comprehend how we experience the mercy of Jesus in the Eucharist. We know intellectually that God is always there for us, but frankly, there are times when God feels far away. Human beings have had that experience for centuries. So God did something decisive. God sends us himself. God sends Christ. And the night before he died, Jesus gave us his body and blood in the gift of the Eucharist so that we could always be nourished by his love, so that we could always be confident of his presence and his nearness. God and his mercy are not far off. God does not let us wander through life isolated or without assistance. Even when every other person and power on the planet has failed us, when we show up at the table of the Eucharist, Christ whispers a different message to our hearts. When we show up at the table of the Eucharist, Christ says to us, "I am as close to you as a mother feeding her child. I am as close to you as a bit of bread and a sip of wine. I am close to you in this sacrament, in this community, in this celebration. I am with you and I love you." The Eucharist is our mercy meal. We need Christ's mercy, so we need to show up. Pope Francis is also inviting us to show up in other ways so that we can experience the power and presence of God's mercy in our lives. The Pope is inviting us to celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation in this holy year. Now, when I first went to confession in the 1970s, it was let's call it an imposing experience. There I was, an 8-year-old boy, entering the darkness of that confessional at my home parish in Pennsylvania, talking to a priest I couldn't see, worried that I would not remember the right words of the prayers. Today, I thank God for the gift of this sacrament. And I've reached that age when I know how much I need the sacrament of reconciliation, because I finally have reached that age when I know how easy it is for me to fool myself or to make excuses for myself. So the sacrament of reconciliation invites me to real honesty and to real exploration about how much I still need conversion. I am blessed when I sit down face to face with a priest, and I can begin by saying a truth which I sometimes don't want to deal with. I am a sinner. I am imperfect. And here's how. The sacrament of reconciliation invites me to name what is broken in my life, to name what hurts. Anyone who's ever participated in a 12-step program for addiction knows that the first step to recovery is this: to admit that you have a problem that is bigger than you. That's the first step to healing. Well, the church has known that for centuries, because that is also the first step in reconciliation, to confess and name what is wrong and broken in my life. And then, in a spirit of honesty, I can talk with the priest about my sins. Why am I doing this? Where is this behavior coming from? Counselors know that so much healing happens when someone is able to speak about the struggles of their lives in a place where it's safe to be honest. Well, the church has known that for centuries, too. We've been doing just that in the sacrament of reconciliation. No matter what I say in that sacrament, in that celebration, will never be spoken of again by anyone. Then, after I've spoken with honesty and truth to the priest, I pray for the Lord's mercy. And the priest, who is ordained to act on behalf of the Lord and his church community, extends his hand to me in prayer and says in a voice that is loud and clear that I am really forgiven, that Christ really forgives everything. And I can walk away from that experience free and forgiven. So whether your last confession was 3 weeks ago or 3 decades ago, I encourage you in this holy year, show up. Christ will be there, and he is mercy. Pope Francis invites us all to be renewed in our personal prayer. The Pope is inviting us to set aside time each day when we can show up before the Lord, listen to him, talk with him, thank him. When you pray, before you ask for anything, be sure to thank God for everything. Meister Eckhart, the great mystical theologian, once said, "If the only prayer you ever say is thank you, that will be sufficient." Gratitude is one of the most powerful spiritual realities. The more I am filled with gratitude, the less room there is for fear or anger. So even if you haven't had a really active personal prayer life for a while, don't be discouraged. Start to show up again. The church has so many tools that can help us to pray, so many methods of prayer for us to explore and to try out. There are devotions like the Rosary, or simple techniques like Lectio Divina, which is the simple, holy reading of the Scriptures day by day. Slowly and simply begin. Explore. And you will find ways to pray. You will find things that help you listen and speak with the Christ who loves you. The most important thing is to keep showing up, even if you think at first that nothing is happening. Something very important is happening. You are there, and Christ is there. And sometimes the most important things are communicated in silence. In this holy year, perhaps you and your household could think about other ways to remind yourself that God is always there with you, under your roof. How might you be reminded that God has shown up in your household? Well, I can tell you what some other people do. Some people make sure that there is a religious image central in every room of the house, or in at least a couple of key rooms. An image like a crucifix or a cross, an icon or a statue, a painting, something. Perhaps that's one way you and your household could mark this holy year. Some people place a large family Bible in a prominent place, perhaps on their dining room table or in their living room, and they read from it before or after supper or right before bed. Some people take holy water home from church, and they bless themselves at bedtime and in the morning. I know many parents who take holy water home and they make the sign of the cross on their child's forehead with that water as a parental blessing as the child goes to sleep at night. Some people use an Advent wreath, or they put up that Christmas creche and they tell their children the story of Christ's birth. Some people bring the palms home from Palm Sunday to remind themselves of who Jesus is and what he has done to save us. Some people listen to sacred or religious music. Many read great books by Christian authors. For instance, right now I am rereading Father James Martin's wonderful book, Jesus, a Pilgrimage. It's a wonderful book about faith and our spiritual journey. I encourage you to read it too. And, perhaps most importantly, I invite you and your household to keep showing up at your parish. Keep showing up for religious education and faith formation. Keep joining the community for prayer, for liturgy, and the celebration of the sacraments. And keep showing up to enter into the service, the ministry, and the outreach that is central to being a disciple of Christ. The more you show up and participate in your parish, the more that parish will feel like home to you. And you will begin to discover in new ways that Christ, the merciful one, is present in every person and everything. But to come to this realization, you have to keep showing up. Some of you may know the name Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day was the great advocate for justice and a founder of the Catholic worker movement here in the United States. She was a tireless worker on behalf of the poor and the oppressed. But this tireless servant of the poor also found time each day to show up for daily Mass. And many times she slipped away to a local church to silently pray in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. Someone once asked her, "Why do you leave your work with the poor in order to go to daily Mass? Couldn't you do more good in your ministry?" And that person also asked Dorothy, "Isn't daily Mass just the same thing, repeated over and over again? Why do you show up for that?" And Dorothy Day said, "Well, going to daily Mass is like the simple kiss that a husband and wife give to each other every morning. Every day, it's the same thing, a simple kiss given quickly. Sometimes the husband and wife aren't really thinking about the kiss, but they do it every day, and they keep doing it every day." And then Dorothy Day said, "But every once in a while, the simple kiss slows down. And quite by surprise, that ordinary daily kiss blossoms into a deeper, more passionate moment of love and joy. But you can't experience that profound moment of love and joy unless you show up for every other ordinary kiss that's repeated every day." That's why Dorothy Day showed up for daily Mass and daily prayer, because she knew that every once in a while that the kiss would slow down and God's mercy would fill her soul. So, during this year of mercy, start showing up and keep showing up. You never know when an ordinary spiritual moment will become a kiss from God that you'll remember for the rest of your life.